Hello, everybody, and welcome to another great episode of My EdTech Life. Thank you so much for joining us on this wonderful day. And wherever it is you're joining us from around the world, I thank you as always for all of your support. We appreciate all the likes, the shares, the follows. Thank you so much for engaging with our content. As you know, we do what we do for you to bring you some amazing conversations and amazing guests like today. So I am really excited to welcome to the show. Well, before I say his name, I've been a longtime follower. He is doing some amazing things. He's got a wonderful newsletter. And after today, please make sure that you do follow him on LinkedIn and all socials. Make sure you subscribe to his Substack because he's got some great stuff. And I would love to welcome to the show Dagan Bernstein. Dagan, how are you?
Aloha mai kako. I'm doing great, Fonz. Thanks for that introduction. Super stoked to be here and talk.
Well, I'm excited, as you know, audience members, if you listened to Dagan's intro there, he is joining us from the wonderful state of Hawaii. And they are, how many hours? Is it 6 hours behind here?
Well, 4 hours behind Central, 5 hours behind East Coast right now. We don't change our clocks. That'll change once the springtime comes. We'll be 6 hours behind East Coast.
There you go. So I
Yeah.
know that we've tried to make an episode happen, a couple months back and so on, but just due to the timing, obviously the time zones, I should say. But now that we're off on holiday break, we definitely made it happen. So I'm excited to have you here, Dagan. And for our audience members who may not be familiar with your work yet and the wonderful things that you're doing, can you give us a little brief introduction and what your context is in the education space?
For sure. Well, as you mentioned, not only am I based in Hawaii here, but I'm very blessed to have been raised here in Hawaii. I'm located on Hawaii Island, which is sometimes called the Big Island, in this little town called Waimea up on the north side of the island, up in the mountains. A lot of people, picture beaches and palm trees. But if I look outside my window, there's green hills and cool breeze blowing through the mountains. And yeah, it's very beautiful. And I'm very blessed to call this home. But my main job is as the director of a capstone project program at the K-8 campus of a K-12 independent school here in Waimea. So every student at our school in grades 5 and 8 completes a year-long independent project that is connected to our school's Malama Kaiōʻulu community sustainability plan. So I oversee about 60 students and about 8 faculty members in this program and support these students as they transition out of elementary into middle school, out of middle school into high school. And we do have a separate campus 912 that's mixed day boarding. And there's a separate capstone director for the senior projects that they do that is a graduation requirement here at our school. So that's kind of my main job. I'm also an eighth grade advisor, and I'm one of the advisory leads for the eighth grade capstone students. I have a cohort of 10 students I work with. And then, of course, as educators, we have worlds outside of the classroom. So, two things I do outside the classroom is I'm just recently announced president-elect for the Hawaii chapter of ISTE here in the state, which I'm really excited about. And I'm also the digital content manager for the National Capstone Consortium, which is a small community of practice that operates under a educational nonprofit to support capstone education across the country here. So those are kind of my main things I got going on in education. And of course, my other like side gig is my little passion project, my Ed3 weekly newsletter, where I get to geek out on blockchain and education and all that stuff.
I love it. Well, that's great. You've definitely, I'm interested to learn a little bit more. I know that a couple of months back, several episodes ago, I did have a guest also that did talk a lot about capstone projects. And I think
Hmm.
that's something that is wonderful and interesting that
Hmm.
I know, at least here in my area and in the Texas area, I don't hear too much about as
Yeah.
students having to complete some capstone projects, these year-long projects,
Yeah.
which is I think something that is great and phenomenal as you're building up these skills throughout the year and you're tying the learning that you're doing into that project. And then at the
Yeah.
end, you're presenting this wonderful portfolio
Yep.
and a wonderful
Yep.
presentation, which I think is fantastic. So that is something that is amazing. And you said you do it, well, it's for all grade level. Well, I'm sorry, I should say you said it was for fifth, for eighth, and then they have a separate one also for high school. Is that correct?
Yep. Yep.
All
Uh-huh.
right. Can you tell us just a little bit more before we definitely geek out more on edtech and everything? Because to me,
Yeah.
this seems something that's very interesting. So
Yeah.
you said it's tied to the community. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, our school has a sustainability plan that we launched, I believe 4 or 5 years ago. And it's called Malama Kaya Ulu. Malama is to care for, and Kaya Ulu is your community. And this was a school-wide sustainability initiative that not only is tied to, of course, when we think of sustainability, we think of resource and energy sustainability, but here really connecting with the Hawaiian worldview, which is around how we sustain our communities and how we sustain and regenerate ourselves as a community. There are four specific practices that are built into this community sustainability plan. And those are lokahi, which is harmony, ha'ina, which is storytelling, pilina, which is connectedness, kuleana, which is responsibility. These four practices kind of make up the community sustainability practices and mindsets. It was about 3, 4 years ago, myself and the other capstone director at the high school at the time, we were kind of at a crossroads a little bit with the capstone program at the school. We had been running it for about 6, 7 years. We just had the first senior class graduate who had done them fifth, eighth, and 12th grade. We were ready to kind of really define and create some parameters around what capstone is at our school. And that's when it really clicked with tying it to this Malama Kaiulu sustainability plan and really getting our kids to think community and how we define community. That could be your neighborhood, it could be your town, it could be the school, it could be the state of Hawaii, it could be global communities. But that really rooted the students in intentionality when they were coming up with their capstone plans. And it also gave the capstone teachers some guardrails to help guide the students, what type of project proposals we could and couldn't approve. And it allowed the program to have real defined goals and outcomes by it being tied to this, pretty significant school initiative that we have.
Wow, that is amazing. That sounds very
Yeah.
robust and just the way it ties together and the way it's broken up into those four segments. It kind of actually reminds me of, when you are going to do your ISTE certification and you're like, hey, is this what
Mhm.
you're going to be the leader? Are you going to be the connector? Are you going to be this?
Yep.
And working towards that and putting a portfolio together and coming up with
Yep.
strategy with seeing the bigger vision in mind. And I think that that is fantastic, even just
Yep.
for, doing it in fifth grade, doing it in 8th
Yep.
grade, and then obviously as a graduation requirement. I mean, those
Yep.
students are leaving with a wealth of knowledge, not only in practice, but critical thinking, collaboration,
Yep.
communication. I mean, you're hitting
Yep.
so many, ways of learning. And man, that is fantastic. I get so excited just listening that there's somebody
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah, no, it's a great model for schools. And part of when I first connected with the consortium back in 2017, we sent a group of teachers as we were kind of building and piloting and defining our program. And I connected with all these educators from across the country and learning about the different capstone models, the different ways schools deploy capstone at their school, depending on what their school values or what their district values. And that is really key, I think. And when I meet with and guide and consult other schools or districts on capstone, I always start with what's your school or district's mission, what's your kind of portrait of a graduate, or what's your defining characteristics, because I can't come and say capstone's got to be this. For my school, tying it to a community sustainability plan works so well because that's our school's initiative. Our school is resourcing that. For other schools, it might be STEM based, it might be research based. They could emphasize public speaking. So I know some schools do a culminating, like, kind of TED Talk, 20-minute TED Talk. Some do more of like a research paper because that's what they emphasize. So there's really no one way to do it. But I think it's a great way for schools to get that authentic manifestation of what they're trying to do. And to get all your stakeholders involved in seeing how the kids are, independently applying the learning that you talked about. What does communication look like? What does collaboration look like? Let's get some authentic artifacts of how that manifests. for themselves as students, and let's give them some choice too. Let's let them, if a student wants to do a podcast about, saving the oceans, let them do that. If they want to do a short documentary film about joining the soccer team and their struggles doing that, let them do that. Obviously, with these authentic artifacts, there's lots of opportunities for either technology to be deployed, or sometimes just I had a kid make skateboard ramps one year because he wanted to do a after school skateboard club. So got him some drills, I got him some wood. He was out there drilling stuff, and he made some skateboard ramps. So there's so many ways that these artifacts can manifest, which is really cool to watch.
I think that is fantastic. And one thing that you said, it's, it's that project based learning in that sense, building up, but the use of technology and the fact that, like you mentioned, I think it's very important. And the last episode or 2 episodes ago with Bonnie Nieves, she was saying how she's working on amplifying student voice. And I think that that's something that is not done as much, at least in my experience with what I've seen, a little bit of lack of discourse in the classrooms and the be
Yep,
able to think, pair, share and share
yep,
ideas and just really hearing
yep,
everything out. I think that is something that's beneficial in education. And I think that what your students are doing through these projects is something that is just amazing. And it really can harness their voice, bring that out, but also they get to know which tools they feel most comfortable with. And at the end, it's great that you get, like you mentioned several times, the word authentic
yeah,
manifestation they're learning. And I think that
yeah,
is something that is fantastic. Wow, that is
yeah,
wonderful, Dagan. That is awesome. Well,
yeah.
let's kind of shift gears a little bit because as
Hmm.
far as talking about technology, as and we know, and just because I do want to bring it up, I know in reading some of your newsletters, you and I are kind of really kind of in the middle. We could be a little bit more critical about like some of the technology that is out there because
Yep,
we want to make sure that it is something that is going to be number one, safe for students. We want to make
yep,
sure that it's something that is not gonna, be a crutch for students also many times
yep,
in, over reliance and things of that sort. And of course, we're talking about generative AI in the
yep,
education space. So
yep,
before we get into a little bit more about what you're experiencing in Hawaii and maybe through schools and districts that you're working with or close with, I want to ask you, what was going through your mind? And I know it's been over 2 years now, a little bit over 2 years. November of 2022, when ChatGPT was announced, what were your initial thoughts? Did you dive in right away? Was it something that you
yep.
kind of was a wait and see? And then now that we've seen so many things in the education space, what are some of your thoughts? I know it's very loaded, but the conversation's gonna be
Yeah,
good.
yeah, totally. Let's talk about it. You know, I mean, first off, I'm always like you, we're always on the bleeding edge, right? Like any new technology, I'm grabbing, I'm using, I'm testing, I'm playing with. So with ChatGPT, like some of the earliest models, I remember ChatGPT 1, 2, 3, like I was playing with all of those. This also goes back, there's a little bit of a side note. I originally studied linguistics. I have a degree in linguistics from University of Oregon. So I had some exposure and knowledge of artificial intelligence and large language model systems going back, as you know, this technology is not very old, but go back to the 50s and 60s.
Mhm.
And predictive text, which is essentially what we're talking about, right? Predictive text. I will never ever forget. I had a professor. I went to college like 97 to 2001. I have no problem dating myself. Just to give some context about what kind of era we're in, I remember we're playing with some of these linguistic concepts around predictive text and how you can predict what the next word would be based on language structure and so forth. There's a whole syntax and semantics typology science behind this. And I remember going like, well, isn't this technology just going to be able to create robots that can talk and text bots that will just create language? And he adamantly was like, no, language is too complex. There's no way a robot can replicate what a human being can create. It's just not possible. It's too unpredictable. There's too many variables. And I was like, okay, interesting. And it always raises my curiosity when someone has a viewpoint that is that sure and adamant. And I'll never forget that because it kind of just planted the seed in my head of like, there's got to be something here. If this professor is so adamant that it's not possible, to me, that means it's got to be possible. So fast forward, 20 years later, as kind of these first models are coming out 2020, 21, 22, and it's COVID and we got lots of time to like play with these tools and kind of nerd out on them. You know, my immediate reaction was this technology essentially can do a lot of the things that our outdated models of learning are asking students to do. Whether that was uh, generate, paragraphs of text, whether that's to solve algorithmically based mathematical problems, which we already had. We had AI. I was an algebra teacher. I had photo math. I used photo math in my classroom. I guided students on how to use it. It was implemented into the learning progression that we use. That's AI. Um, and I just knew the simplicity of this tool, the accessibility of it, the there was something so intuitive about it. Here's a text box, which we've all been using Google now for years. You put in some query, you put in some text, which a lot of people are doing, was to create poems. That seemed to be like the cool thing to do when you first started with ChatGPT. Write a poem about, you know, making pasta or something, and it would like generate a poem. But I could see that all these things that we ask students to do, just to solve a simple equation, to regurgitate factual information. This can do all that. It can do it faster. Sometimes it can do it better. So my wondering was, how are we going to react? How are we as educators going to react to this? And as you know, our systems of education are extremely complex. They're very, very complex systems. And to really peel apart kind of the complexity of these systems and get to the heart of what we're asking our learners to do, um, it's hard to disrupt that. And I just don't believe that one technology tool will do that. And a lot of this comes from Justin Reich from MIT. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he has a fabulous book called Failure to Disrupt. And he talks about the progression of technology and education going back to the 70s and how a technology tool on its own won't do it. You can't just plop some tech tool in the middle of learning and it's going to change everything because we've had these discussions before. It started with desktop computers in the 70s. It started with laptops. It started with mobile phones was going to do it. iPads was going to do it. All these things were supposed to do it. And here we are repeating that same line. This is disrupting education. This is disrupting education. Well, is it changing things? Of course. Disruption is a bigger word that involves a much deeper kind of breaking down within the system. So, my wondering remains, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna react? The technology's here. The technology's out there. Pretty much every single school and
Mm.
district is using some sort of AI. I mean, there's some holdouts, but whether it's these, large, platforms, these large companies that have I'm gonna use the word infiltrated our schools, our districts, and selling these products. They're in our kids' hands. And I think if you know a lot of teachers, my wife's a teacher who's not a bleeding edge technologist like myself. If you talk to teachers and you have conversations with teachers, it's a lot. It's a lot to just say you're gonna learn this tool and you're gonna rethink everything you do as a teacher because of this tool. Um, but on the other side of it, it's here and something's got to give. And I
Mhm.
think we're just working our way through it the best way we can. Um, and it's going to be a very interesting 10, 20 years is what I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to highlight a couple things because I think you and I are the same wavelength, and a lot of colleagues that I talk to about is when they said like the
Yep.
disruption of education. You said it very well too. I mean, we've had these conversations. That's the same points that I bring up. The iPads. Oh my gosh, we're one to one. This is going to
Yep.
disrupt education. Everything is going to go according to plan. The learning is going to be there. The scores, and I'm still yet to see any really incremental change in any kind of state testing scores, then they're like, oh, this is going to personalize or individualize learning. Like you mentioned, there are several platforms that even in districts we have used that have a certain algorithm that as students progress through a lesson and it'll find which problems they're missing the most, and then it'll go ahead and give them a little bit more of that, as far as practice is concerned. So some of those applications are there with the algorithms, but sometimes I'm thinking to myself, okay, you're individualizing the learning, but in the sense of the student is getting these questions wrong and the program is just giving them more practice on that, but there really isn't a why are we missing this? What is the root of that? And so on. And I think a lot of the big claims, from a lot of the rappers that are out there that have come into the classrooms are like, yes, we're going to go ahead, up your scores. We're going to go ahead and change this. And the scores are going to go up, 36% literacy skills going up. And I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a minute, like, how and where? And then when you do question and say, hey, can we see those studies? Which I have reached out to them. You don't get, a reply at all whatsoever. You get something very polite and very canned.
Yep.
But I'm like, hey, if this is what you're saying is happening, I want to see those reports and what type of school districts is it that you're working with that do have access to this? And is it, those upper echelon schools that can afford your tool or are these
Yep.
schools that are not able to afford your tool? And now we're seeing that there is some incremental growth and change. But the word disruption for me right now, as you were saying it, I'm thinking this is really kind of disrupting sort of our piece as educators because now, of course, we have both sides. I'm honestly, I always try and remain in the middle. And in with the
Yep.
podcasts and the shows, I always kind of want to be that connector. If there is something that
Yep.
could possibly work well, we give that a little bit of light and we give them the opportunity. But then we'll have some teachers that'll say, hey, you know what, maybe this isn't working as well. And then just kind of back and forth on it, have that dialogue and discourse. It's very important. But I think when there are companies that really want to disrupt and try to get in, almost somewhat force themselves in a way just by giving you the product for free and just using you as a case study and just to better suit themselves. That's kind of where I have some issues too, and the importance of that data privacy. Now, one
Yep.
thing I do want to ask, and as far as in, you've told us a little bit about your thoughts, and how your wife also feels, maybe a little bit overwhelmed because there's so much. But overall, there in Hawaii, with not only in your school and your teachers, but maybe what you hear around the island. What are some of the things that are coming up as far as Gen AI and maybe this so-called disruption in education?
Yeah. And so, part of my role, being on the board of HISTE, which I've been now for, I think about 3, 4 years and now president elect. One reason I joined HISTE was to be more connected with the public school teaching community here in Hawaii. Hawaii has one of the highest rates of private school enrollment in the country. We're typically very, very high in that. It's lots of competition. It's highly desirable to enroll in private school here. So I I lived in both. I attended public school all the way up to middle school, was very blessed that my dad, who is a technologist, who was hired as the director of IT, got hired at this wonderful independent school that I currently teach at. So I was able to go to this independent school. So I saw both worlds. My mom was a public school teacher for over 25 years in some of our most rural and challenged schools in the state for all the metrics, literacy rates, teen pregnancy rates, drug use, all that. So, Mhm. you know, there's obviously two different worlds, right? The independent school I'm at, highly resourced. We have a dedicated educational technologist. We have thoughtful, collaborative implementation of these tools. We have the resources to beta test some, talk about which ones we want to use. We have faculty who are resourced to get training in these tools and so on and so forth. The things I'm hearing and seeing in the public school space are very different. In general, what I love about Hawaii teachers is these are some of the most passionate, engaged, professional, eager to learn, curious teachers I've ever met. I attend a lot of professional development, conferences. I provide professional development, not only in my role with HISTE, but individually. And the eagerness by the teacher population to learn new tools, learn new skills, implement them in their classroom, test them, reflect on their use, collaborate with other teachers is through the roof. I mean, I am just always so thankful to get to work with these wonderful educators and learn from them. Unfortunately, the system of our public school education and what makes Hawaii very unique is we have one state Department of Education that makes decisions at a state level. We do not have autonomous individual districts like most other states do. I think Utah might be the only other state that has just one state kind of governing board that makes decisions. So obviously that makes things tricky. You know, we're a archipelago of islands. We have different islands. We have different student populations. We have different economies. We have Honolulu, which is a city. We have my island, which is much more rural. So you have these decisions being made at the state level that impact all these different schools. And you have people who are mostly centered in Honolulu who are tasked with trying to show teachers how to use these tools to provide professional development across the different islands. And I know through conversation with them how challenging it is for them. You know, you can only travel by airplane here. And as you know, it's a lot more difficult to get around by airplane and then a 2 hour car drive to these remote districts. So those are kind of some of the mechanisms that are hard to really get a cohesive vision for what AI looks like across these schools where, as you know, in public schools, they have to be decided at the administrative level. You can't have schools just kind of doing whatever, right? There's toggles that need to be turned on.
Mm.
There's toggles that need to be turned off. There's layers of bureaucracy. You know, what can we let them use? What do we turn on? I know that they've tested or they've deployed some tools that they thought were safe, but it turns out that there is some data extraction that they weren't comfortable with. So they had to turn off access to those tools and their AI features. Um, there is also the issue of, you know, we as a state are a Google state, like we use the Google suite of apps. So obviously Google has its own kind of AI LLM that can be used. But again, what do you allow? What do you not allow? What do the teachers know how to use? And so on and so forth. So I think there's an eagerness to and a collaborative spirit to try and figure out what is going to be best for our keiki, what is best for our young people here. I am not getting a sense that there's like big division or conflicts about what who should be kind of involved in these discussions. I'm seeing a lot of intentional discussion and collaboration around what to do, and then just the challenges with our unique geography, our unique demographics, and our unique kind of system at the state level. But overall, like I think we have an amazing state superintendent of schools here. I think he's very, very on the ground. He's very connected with our different, you know, kind of leaders at the state level. So all those things seem to have a lot of um, positives going for it. But as you know, like we were saying, like these systems of school are just they're difficult. It's messy. Schools are messy things, you know. But I'm confident that we can continue to um, to improve and to get closer to having a positive impact in our schools. And I that hope comes from how we reacted to remote instruction during COVID. Um, the state here, I think we did a great job with teachers mobilizing, teachers collaborating, and leveraging their shared expertise to support each other and to do the best we can. And I'm seeing a
Mm.
similar thing now with AI.
Yes. No, and you're absolutely right. You described so many things as far as barriers to adoption and entry. And like you said, the school system is very messy. Even schools within a district and then a district within there's so many things like you said, bureaucracy and things that you have to go through just to get an app going, even for your campus. And then, of course, that raises the issue as far as equity, like why do they get to have it? Why don't we get to have
Yep.
it? And so on. And I think that's been some of the hardest things for me seeing in my district is that
Mm.
we have a very, very tight budget and we have certain apps that are there for teachers that are used significantly. But we know that there are new things that come out, or you have teachers that go to a conference and they get so excited about something and then they get the freemium access and then they're like, oh, we want this, we want this. But is there enough data to back it up? Then all of a sudden we get the requisitions, but then the campus says, well, this is what we want to buy. But then we say, well, it exceeds this limit. So we can't, buy it. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, we don't have it. And then that's where, you kind of get stuck. You get a little taste of it. Maybe some of it was good, maybe some of it was bad, but we don't,
Yep.
as far as with the excitement too, many times we don't look into the ethics of it. And as far as for me,
Yep.
the biggest thing is just the data privacy side. I mean, there's a very prominent company. I know you wrote about it in your last newsletter. And when you look at their terms of service, it'll even tell you that their knowledge cutoff date for their LLM, I believe, is 2023. And I believe it was July 2023, which for a lot of audience members that maybe have not heard the term, the knowledge cutoff date is that's up until when, I guess it has within their LLMs that data or that information. And so I know with many states coming up with new standards and so on, my question
Mm.
is this updated to the new standards? Because like you mentioned, you yourself having the experience with linguistics, it just simply will predict that next word. But is it accurate? Is it the way that is
Yep.
supposed to be taught? Is it the way that it's supposed to be? Is the content that is being produced the correct content to fit what the state demands and the way that the student learns it? And oftentimes, I think a lot of teachers they're not aware of that, number one, because they don't go in that deep. For teachers,
Yep.
it's like, hey, if this is going to give me something a little quicker, then let me try and use it, which is another selling point, which is, oh, this is going to
Yep.
save you time. This is going to give you that time back. And that's one of the things too, where a lot of people that are selling you on this are people that are no longer in the classrooms and they don't realize that, even us that do dabble in this and may use it, we still say like, hey, this isn't even accurate or wrong. It's like it would have been a lot faster if I ended up writing it myself or doing the research and so on. So those are a lot of things too, like to consider that I know that I've seen. And
Yep.
like I mentioned, I think you and I stand very firm on that particular platform, and the way that it's sold and the way that it's out there. So my question to you is, if you here, and it might be a loaded question here too, but
Mm.
if you, Dagan, were to reimagine education and rethink education with AI as a central component, what would be some of the things that you would love to see? Maybe starting from a high level to a low level. What are some of the things that you would say, okay, I would feel comfortable with this as a tool and possibly seeing that this may help student success?
Yeah, I mean, to answer that question, I gotta back it up because as you know, like, we can't just start with the tool, right? Like, you
Mhm.
can't just grab the hammer and start hitting things. And that's where I think so much of this discussion is being missed, and that's why your podcast is so important because you get into that nuance. You're not just full on AI evangelist or just full on like the robots are coming to destroy us. Like we need to get into the weeds a little bit, right? And for me, we got to start with the teaching and the learning. The more this technology becomes prevalent, the more we should be digging in to effective pedagogy to support deep, meaningful learning for young people. And I'm afraid we're having the opposite. There's an inverse. The more AI we're getting, the more we're leaning into these automative, fact-based types of regurgitative learning. And that to me is problematic. Um, there's a number of pedagogical models that can support deep learning, whether that's project-based learning, experiential learning, capstone. There's 100 different buzzwords that are out there, but I think essentially get to the same thing is that students doing real stuff. Like we need young people to be getting in there and doing stuff when you're being creative, when you're coming up with original ideas, when you're challenging yourself and you're engaged in deep, meaningful, hard learning. There are going to be unknowns that are going to come up that should trigger your deep questioning and curiosity and imagination. And in those moments, a tool like AI obviously can be a great collaborator and support to address those hard, deep, meaningful, imaginative thinking problems. I have always said, and I stand by this, AI should be making you work harder. If someone's telling you AI is going to make it easier, red flag. Because when I use AI, I got to work that thing. I got to prompt it. I got to consider what it's telling me. I got to follow up with more questions. I need to ask deeper questions. I need to take what it's giving me. And like when you're trying to do hard things, the AI should be working hard, or else you're hardly working. You're doing something that's just too simple. So that's the disconnect I'm seeing. We're stuck in this lane. And that's kind of that flywheel you were talking about. Sure, an AI platform can promise, 35% higher this or 20% higher testing this. Well, what are the tests testing? Oh, okay. Well, it probably should help those kids, quote, test higher on those things because that's what it's designed to do. But I'm going to back it up and just say, well, let's just get rid of those because those tests aren't what's really accessing deep, meaningful learning. And my fear is, well, let's jump ahead here 100 years. Okay, like right now we have 100 years of this industrial model of learning, right? This model of learning was launched 100 years ago because we had industrial mechanized systems and we needed to train workers to complete repetitive tasks over and over. Okay, so now we're looking about 100 years going, whoa, this doesn't work anymore. So now what we're doing though is we're basically just mapping that same thinking into an AI robotic world. And we're saying, well, okay, well, we're in an AI world. AI is going to disrupt our economy and AI is going to disrupt our jobs. So let's just make all these young people AI prompt automators. Okay, well, we're doing the same thing. It's going to be 2021, 24, and we're going to look back and be like, wow, that AI evolution didn't really work. Well, duh. So, and sorry, I get super animated about this stuff because we got to do the hard work. You know it, Fonz. We got
Yes.
to get in there and like we got to talk about what is teaching, what is learning, what is deep learning, what does it look like. You talk to the teachers, you talk to the people in the classrooms. They know what good learning looks like. These are professional educators, and they know when you just put a prompt machine in front of a kid and have them prompt some stuff, it's a surface level things.
Mm-hmm.
So, to kinda answer your question, what is, like, AI look like? Well, it first looks like rethinking what deep, meaningful, authentic learning looks like, and let's start there, and then along the way, when we can leverage a very amazing tool like AI to support that, let's bring it in. Otherwise, let's leave it out.
Yeah. I like that approach because I think oftentimes now what we're seeing is the tool comes first. And then the teaching is really not there anymore. Like you mentioned, it's like the art of teaching, the art of
Yep.
engagement, the discourse, because now, like you said, it just seems that one of the things that I had a conversation about, and believe it or not, I had a conversation about this with Aidik Bear from CurryPod. He said, like, all these platforms that are coming out that are focusing on individualized learning and in personalized learning. He said, like, all of that seems like it came from COVID, where we were creating and the students had to work on things individually. And now they still want to do that, but who's giving them the feedback? And how's the teacher keeping in touch with so many students working and giving them that immediate feedback where they can stop and they can readdress the students, fix those misconceptions. And then the apps don't allow for students to actually have discourse and discussion to be able to work with one another, amplify their voices, and then, of course, have the teacher be that learning engineer who is facilitating the whole instruction and everybody's participating. But it seems like the focus is more on the tool than kind of that art of teaching and engagement. So I agree with you on that as far as what you were saying, focus on that first and then sprinkle in the tool whenever you can. And it doesn't have to be tool heavy many times. Just color pencils and crayons may do magic too as well in the learning process. That's what
Yep.
it's all about. So
Yep.
keeping it simple and streamlined many times. Well, Dagan, before we wrap up and finish up with the last three questions, please tell us a little bit about your newsletter and where
Yep.
educators, or actually anybody, education practitioners, educators, or anybody that is interested on the topic can find your newsletter, and how often do you produce your newsletter?
Yeah, yeah. So, as I mentioned, my geeky technology, passions and interests, um, led me to the wonderful world of blockchain. Starting around, 2015, 2016 is when I first got curious about it. And it actually came from my life as a musician, because I'm a former musician. I still play music. I still record music and perform music. And I heard about artists and musicians encoding digital files using this blockchain technology. And so I got really curious about it. Um, and then it was kind of on the burner, but fast forward to 2022, I connected with the folks over at the Ed3 DAO who were um, building a kind of Web3 based educator community to explore Web3 and blockchain. Um, and I just started immersing myself in this world. And I had this idea to start a newsletter. And my number one goal with starting this newsletter was I told myself, if I publish a newsletter every week, it'll force me to learn new things every week. That was honestly the sole motivation for it. So I published my first newsletter. I just put in like any resources I could find that sounded interesting about blockchain, education, Web3, the metaverse, kind of all these technologies in this ecosystem, AI. Um, and I just started publishing this newsletter, and I called it Ed3 Weekly, and Ed3 is kind of this catch-all term that combines education and Web3. And I put that together. And I have tomorrow my 140th issue coming out, which is just amazing because I've just kept with it, kept pumping it out. So yeah, you can find that on Substack at Ed3 Weekly, or go to the website ed3weekly. And of course, I got all the socials there on X and Instagram at Ed3 Weekly. Or on LinkedIn, I cross post it to my own personal LinkedIn profile. So you can find me on LinkedIn and get that right in your LinkedIn if you prefer it that way every week. And yeah, I've stuck with it. There's always new, interesting resources or news or ideas happening around kind of blockchain and education. So I usually post like, three or four resources. Then I have a weekly deep dive, which might take an idea that's kind of associated, whether that's future of work or future of learning or the changing tech landscape, or just something that's maybe a little kind of on the side. And I'm always keeping the educator in mind. I'm trying to find, there's so much noise out there, right? Especially in the crypto space. It's like noise, 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 right? So I'm trying to find the stuff that's like interesting, relevant, and meaningful for educators. So yeah, I encourage everyone to subscribe if you're just kind of Web3 curious or tech curious, and you know, keep the conversation going. I'm always posting on X and LinkedIn about my resources, and I'm trying to encourage conversation around this topic because I think we're going to see AI Web3 converge in the next 10 years. So I think it's really important that we stay kind of at least peripherally knowledgeable about blockchain technology as it emerges and converges in our learning spaces.
Yes, sir. Excellent. Well, definitely all that will be linked in the show notes. So all our
Awesome.
audience members, you can definitely make sure that you check it out and subscribe because Dagan does bring out some amazing ed tech bits and bytes that he puts on there. And it's just a quick little resource that you can go ahead and do some
Yep.
quick learning and learn and just be on top of things. And of course, oftentimes, learning from one another really helps out a lot, seeing some new ideas and maybe like very nuanced ideas that Dagan may bring out and things that to get us thinking as educators, which is oftentimes something that is wonderful and great that we definitely need to keep up with. At the changing of the landscape is so quick. So thank you so much for
Yep.
that resource, Dagan. All right,
Yep.
so Dagan, are we ready to wrap up the show? We always ask our guests the last three questions, so hopefully you're ready because I'm really excited to hear some of your answers on these. As always, this is one of my favorite parts of the show, just to kind of lighten up the mood a little bit and just to hear a little bit more about our guests, at that personal level and just their thought process too, as well. So let's go ahead and get started with our first questions. As you know, every superhero has a pain point or a weakness. So we know that for Superman, kryptonite kind of weakened him. I want to ask you, Dagan, in the current state of education, what would you say is your current edu kryptonite?
Well, I've brought it up a lot today, but it's definitely inefficient systems. I have a physical reaction when I think about just these inefficient systems. It always creates roadblocks and blockades to what we're trying to do. And in education, it's so frustrating when we have, and every teacher knows it, right? It's the stuff we talk about in the faculty lounge or when we're getting coffee. Just like, can you believe, like, why did I this form and that form? They sent it back to me and I had to do this. It's like, I just wanted a bus. I just wanted to get a bus. So those inefficient systems just frustrate me so much. That's definitely my kryptonite there.
There you go. That's good. And that is a great answer. I'm sure that a lot of people will be able to relate to that one for sure. All right. Question number two is if you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
All right. Well, my billboard would be 2 words, and it would be "Live Aloha." Live Aloha. This concept of aloha, which is so tied here to Hawaii, it's kind of generic. The tourists, they say it when you get off the airport, "Oh, aloha, aloha." But here, for the people of Hawaii, it is just a key part of how we live and how we operate. It's how we sustain ourselves, our relationships, and it's so important. There's different ways you can define aloha and what it means. But really, it's essentially doing things for the sake of giving to others and for helping other people and getting fed by doing good for others. That's what living aloha is. It can be little things, putting your cart back at the supermarket, waving someone in traffic, or just stopping and talking story with someone, and just kind of having those moments, just let time stop, but always thinking of the other person and how your actions impact other people. So I think if more people were to live aloha, and to have that mindset, I think our world could be a better place.
I love that. That is wonderful. It's just being
Yep.
present, being there and just, being very service oriented and I love that. That's wonderful. All right.
Yep.
Tegan, last question is if you could trade places with one person for a day, who would it be and why?
Okay. Well, I mentioned I'm also a musician. So for me, it would be John Frusciante, the guitarist from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. They're my favorite band. Um, he's my favorite guitar player since I was a teenager, and I try and go see them in concert whenever I'm over in the States. And just watching him just rip a guitar solo, just all out, all his emotions, all his feelings, just into the guitar, into the music, and just the amount of love that is shared from the audience, and just the band. It's just it's something that I would love to be able to experience, that, and I just have so much respect for him as an artist and as a creative. Um, so John Frusciante is, like, the first one that came to mind when I thought of that. I have a long list of, people I admire, but I would love to just one day, just be John Frusciante for one concert. That would be just unreal.
Fantastic. That is a great answer, Dagan. Well,
Yeah.
Dagan, it's been wonderful, being able to speak with you and hear your story and just the great work that you're doing. Obviously, also learning a little bit more about your perspective and the way that things work in Hawaii and, talking Gen AI and just geeking out on those things. And so thank you so much. I know it's been a while that we've been trying to make this happen. I'm glad it worked out. The timing was just right and the conversation was great. It definitely filled my bucket. So thank you so much for the wonderful work that you're doing, all your wonderful shares, and for all our audience members too as well. Please make sure that you connect with Dagan. You'll be able to get all that information in the show notes when you visit our website at myedtech.life, where you can check out this amazing episode and the other 305 wonderful episodes where I promise you, you will find some knowledge nuggets that you can sprinkle on to what you are already doing great. So thank you as always for all of your support. And please, if you haven't followed us on all socials, follow us. We are everywhere at My EdTech Life, at My EdTech Life. And please also jump over to our YouTube channel, give us a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't done so yet. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. We're almost there, not quite, but could you be our 1,000 subscriber? So please make sure that you visit our website so you can go ahead and subscribe already. And again, my friends, thank you as always from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate all of your support. And this is probably going to be the last show before we get into the new year. I just want to wish you all a wonderful 2025 that is coming. Again, we appreciate all of your support. And for you guys, I wish you the best in 2025. So thank you as always. And until next time, my friends, don't forget, stay techie.